Good afternoon. I can see some tired faces. I will be delaying your lunch by 30 minutes, but I see you are already food insecure. So let me ask you to stand up just for a minute. I know there's some little energy left, and you want to send it back to where it should be. So just stretch. Ask the person on your left if he's food secure, and turn. Yeah. Turn around and ask the person at your back if he's food secure. Thank you. Thank you. You can now sit. I want to release our presenters who've just done a wonderful job. And I'm asking if there's some questions for them from the auditorium. Anybody with a question to our presenters? Yes, microphone, please. Microphone, please. Let's start from the back. There's a question from the back there. Just stand up, please. Be brief. Yourself.
Hello, okay.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ASEC, for this conference. Engineer Clement Kiprotich Kiptum. I work at the University of Eldoret. I have a couple of questions here, and I will start with John Jairo. In John Jairo's models of PPPs, they talked about university engagement. So I want to know, how are those universities recruited in those PPPs model they talked about? Then to Kachuma, I've seen you do a lot of work in terms of fish farming, and my question is, do you have any university collaborating with you in doing the fish studies and research? Then to my friend Professor Gumbe, some of your last slides, they were talking about decreasing land sizes. Now, what is the correlation between the reduction in land sizes and mechanization? Is it in Kenya? Do we have any data regarding that correlation between mechanization and land sizes? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you have a microphone down here?
Yeah, sorry, they are saying, I repeat the first question. How are the universities recruited into the PP partnership that you use?
Thank you. Next question, engineer.
Thank you very much. Mine is to REREC and the power suppliers. You said that you're taking power to the irrigation scheme. One of the issues that yesterday we were told that there was a time when we were producing, the yield was 30 bags, but the cost of production was 50 bags. I mean, in terms of cost. When you take power there, I think at this day and age we have a lot of renewable energy. How come we haven't thought of a wind power or solar energy instead of taking the grid power to Galana? At least the grid should actually be the standby, so that the main power supply, because the biggest cost in the production of that irrigation scheme is actually the power. So we need to look at another way of reducing the cost further. Of course, having done generators, I don't know how that thought came through. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, engineer. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And my question is directed to Engineer Professor Larry Gumbe. Very good presentation. Of course, you did not have the time. And I think this was actually whispered to me. We have been talking of mechanization for the last 30 years. Shida iko wapi?
Thank you. I think, any more questions? I see two, so I will take these ones, then we will. Yvette, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. So, how are the universities recruited? So, according to the paper, the universities were conducting this research on how sugarcane molasses could be used as a food supplement for livestock. So they identified who are the big players in the market, in the Ugandan market, and that's how they were able to find this private company that had mass production of sugarcane, and one of the byproducts was the sugarcane molasses. Thank you.
But I will do it last.
Thank you. The powerman can take the next set.
Just answer your question.
Okay. Oh, it's working, eh?
Thank you so much, Engineer Mutilili, for that good question. I will answer it in many answers. You'll realize that we have decided to power Galana Kulalu, not using the grid per se, but using Malindi Solar Power Plant, which was transferring the entire power to the grid, which was not benefiting the locals there. Because once it goes to the grid, it benefits everyone in the country. So we thought that was the nearest solar power plant. So we will be given first priority to use that solar power plant to power Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme. However, Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme will grow. It is a moving target. There's so much land that has been set aside for that particular irrigation scheme. So for now, we will use Malindi. But as it grows, we look at how much water do we need, how much power do we need. Then, of course, it is in the pipeline whereby now we might now decide, rather than now depend on Malindi solar power plant, we do a proper solar power plant for that particular irrigation scheme because there's enough land for the same. But now, this is more like an emergency because to do a solar power plant is also, I've also mentioned that it is huge when it comes to investment of renewable energy sources. It's only later that you realize the fruits, but at the initial cost, the capital expense is quite huge. And now we are not even affecting the grid. We are actually using Malindi. We are now utilizing something that is closer. But going forward, I think for those ones who presented yesterday, unfortunately I was not here, I think we are doing so little on Galana Kulalu. There's still so much to be done for it to be fully utilized. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, mine, I just forgot the name of my friend, but to respond, GDC is doing a collaborative framework agreements with universities and tertiary colleges within Nakuru and also outside Nakuru. For example, we have those pilot projects where we are trying to, the direct use projects, demonstration projects that I demonstrate here. Those colleges come, we train them, and then we take them through the process, especially those students who are taking those courses. Number two, also on capacity building, we have a program under the United Nations training program that is sponsored by, it's a collaboration between GDC, KenGen, and UNU, GTP in Iceland, where we incorporate students from Kenyatta University and other universities within the region for that training. It's a 3 weeks training that we usually take them annually. Thank you so much if I have responded well.
Thank you very much to the same friend from the University of Eldoret, I believe. Decreasing land sizes, is there some correlation? In other words, has there been some study? Engineer Kanoi, has there been one recently? Yeah, it's experience, huh? And I also do experience that where in these areas which used to thrive, when we see their smaller land sizes, we see the amount produced in those areas are not as much as they were before. And those of us who come from those areas see that there's a lot more demand for us to send money to people in those areas. But I have seen some studies of this in other countries, and I think if you search them, you will be able to get them and see that correlation. It is quite possible to have higher production in a smaller sized land, but you'd have to have more capital investment. For instance, you'd have to go to greenhouses. You'd have to go to vertical agriculture. You'd have to go to, I once went to the United States of America, long time ago, And I went to a place where they were producing chicken. And at that time, I was telling the gentleman, we have BAT Kenya producing chicken near the river. They are producing, that time, 20,000 birds. Huh? We are producing a lot. He took me to this place without telling me. And at the end of the day, I was told there were 2 million birds there. In a small area up there, and there was CCTV everywhere. So it's quite possible in a small area to produce more like they do in the Netherlands. Huh? But you'd have to have a lot of capital investment. Generally, the economies of scale are reduced if you have smaller farms, generally. Engineer Margaret Ogai, the indefatigable one, she's a very successful person and she's going to succeed again. Thank you very much. Good registrar. Bonga points. Yes, no, the discussion has not gone on about mechanizing agriculture for 30 years. It's been going on for about 70 years. Even before independence, our pre-independence leaders discussed and analyzed these issues. And many of them in Africa were agreed that mechanizing our agriculture rapidly at the beginning was not the correct way to go. However, in the last 20, 30 years, they are beginning to change. And right now, Kenya has really changed because our policy is now 2021. Was there another one before that? There was a draft one in 2017. So from independence, the first time we have a policy from government on agricultural mechanization is the year 2021. So we say better late than never.
Yes, I'm going to give you a chance. Please, let's be brief. Let's take the last set of questions. Let's start from there. Sorry. Daktari,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think my question is directed at the rugby player or engineer and professor, because you know, we have very many people in the lines that we are talking about who have very small parcels of land, and most of us have come from there. You know, we have been, you know, digging with the chambers and everything. Okay, and the government has Kenya Kwanza government today is talking about bottom up. Yeah, how are we going to solve the problems of the people down there in terms of the mechanization part of it and in terms of energy? Yeah, because I think that if you solve that problem, I think then you will be achieving quite a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. Microphone there at the back. Just a minute. You will.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the good presentations. My question is to Engineer Moses Kachumo of GDC. And he spoke of the brilliant idea of storing the energy in the geothermal steam in hydrogen for industrial use. Now, coming back to agriculture, when you look at the cost of fuel today, we expect it going to impact, and in no small way, the farmers, especially in transporting their produce to market. Have they thought of, and hydrogen has been identified as even an alternative to battery electric in mobility. Have they thought of using this hydrogen to power transportation for use by the farmers, and probably how it will be made available to them where they need it? Thank you.
Thank you. At the back.
Hello, I'm Fenton Sopande from the State Department for Housing. My question goes to the Professor Larry. We find that in Kenya, we've always had the resistance to mechanization, especially on the issue of job losses. And generally, from my understanding, is that the way we always do our mechanization is not geared towards increasing production rather than increasing profits for multinationals. We find that in most cases, the small farmer do not have the capacity to mechanize.
Brief to the question, please.
Yes, the small farmer do not have the capacity to mechanize, so the mechanization is left for the multinationals. The second question is, with the fragmentation of land, if we are to mechanize, looking for example, a place like Kisii, which produces food, but the land has now been fragmented. How do you handle this in other areas
Thank
around
you.
the world? Okay.
Right there. Last one. You will.
Thank you. My name is Charles from the EBK Cohort 3 internship program. And I wanted to ask with regards to the mechanization, whether there has been any effort to engage some of the manufacturing companies, like for example, numerical machining complex, like there is Protec Automation, there is Steelstone, and also there are other universities that deal a lot with manufacturing. I don't know if there's been any effort to see how they could hasten the mechanization process, because I know like there are some manufacturing companies that are struggling with like jobs, they don't have as many, and they are probably closing down. So I don't know if that would help, maybe if there has not been any engagement with those companies, whether that would help with the increase in mechanization.
Thank you. Engineer, make your comment very brief, please. A brief comment.
When I comment, I don't think I'm robable.
Make it brief, please.
Yeah. Mine was just on the GDC. You said that you are encouraging people not to do the outsource the job outside the country, isn't it? But what I was saying, you are the person in position to effect that. You people in the government, you should not expect the ASEC people to effect that. They should ask you to effect it. Next time, when you are doing RFP, ensure that that RFP has got local component or local consultant in them. Even if the management requires that you outsource the foreign consultant, but do like Ken has done, or mostly Ken, that RFP must have a local consultant as a condition to be issued out. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer. I believe you are speaking to all the agencies in-house. Thank you. Please take the questions briefly so that we can proceed.
Thank you, Engineer Matu. I feel your pain of we not having enough land to mechanize. However, I think this is for all of us to advise the government. We've got, for you to be able to mechanize, you need some huge tracts of land. However, most of our populations are in those areas where we have got enough rainfall. And with time, we've concentrated our populations there. So there's no land anymore. That is why we should now look at other counties. A good example is Taita Taveta, Kilifi County, Isiolo, Turkana. Those are some of the counties in this country which have got very good arable land, but with irregular rainfall patterns. So that is the place where the government should now focus on providing irrigation solutions, hence facilitate mechanization. Because you cannot do mechanization without irrigation, because it has to have precision. For you to be able to mechanize, you have to have precision. And one way of ensuring that your precision works is to provide the most important aspect of agriculture, which is water. And that can only be done through irrigation. I hope we are now on the same page. I also wanted to mention something else. When I started my presentation, I said 80% of Kenya is asal. So we only have 20% with enough rainfall, and that's where our population is concentrated. So you can imagine we are fighting for 20%, and that 20% which has got regular rainfall, Nairobi is part of it. Is Nairobi arable? I would want someone to answer me. Is Nairobi arable? It is full of concrete. There are houses all over the place. So it is not arable, but it is it's part of that 20% that gets rainfall. So I would rather we focus on the 50% that is arable, but part of the 50% that is arable but does not have rainfall, so that now we can give an opportunity to our good professor to now implement or give ideas on the mechanization. So irrigation is actually an enabler for mechanization. Then there's also another aspect. I think when you're talking about food security, we focus so much on agriculture in terms of crops. We forget another very major aspect, which is livestock and fish. REREC has done quite a lot when it comes to islands. If you go to Lake Victoria, we've got quite a number of, until the other day before Kenya did the road to Rusinga, Rusinga had no electricity. So that means if a fisherman goes in the morning to get fish, he has to consume that fish by tomorrow. Otherwise it will go bad. So one way of ensuring that we've got food security is through storage. Our friend from GDC talked about drying maize. That is one way of ensuring that you store, because when you produce, you can produce more. But also to ensure that you have food security, you have to store. When it comes to meat and fish, we don't focus on it. One key enabler of ensuring that we can be able to store fish and meat is by providing power in the rural areas, because this fish and meat is mostly in the rural areas, in those islands, in Wasini, where they do not have electricity. And we actually, right now, World Bank has partnered with Kenya Power and REREC, and we are going to do 100 and something mini-grids, and that will revolutionize those islands, because now they will be able to have fridge, even in our own houses. How do you store food? I'm sure most of us will buy like 10 kgs and use it over the month. That is a way of storage, and the only way to store is to have, for you to have refrigeration, you need power. So we are doing quite a lot in that space to ensure that we provide electricity, which goes a long way in storage and ensuring that these people can store their food and they can get value for money for storing it longer. Because if you have forced to sell your fish tomorrow, then you'll have to sell it at throwaway price. But if you can store it for maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 days longer, that means you can be able to get value for the same. So what I was saying in short is, let us think of government providing arable land by supporting irrigation to enable mechanization. We need to think away from the traditional areas, that 20% that we have all grown in and we all want to be there. Then, and we can borrow a leaf from those multinationals. Del Monte, where Del Monte has planted pineapples. It is basically a dry area. It is in between Moranga and Ukambani. But you can see the power of irrigation and mechanization. They were able to produce a lot. Yeah. So in short, I think the solution is to come from us engineers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think mine is on green hydrogen. Here we are talking about, you can get hydrogen from the hydrocarbons, okay? And that is not green hydrogen. That is called maybe black hydrogen, because it depends on the source. But now we're talking about green hydrogen, where we get it from geothermal. And geothermal, of course, the most important thing is that if you check in the country today, the cheapest source of power is geothermal, and it acts as a base load. It's not an intermittent source of power. And that is why there is a lot of push. There is the green hydrogen draft policy document, which is under formulation now by the government of Kenya, or by the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, and which is being reviewed by the stakeholders. So there's a lot of push to have this policy in place for us now to place ourselves strategically and have the components that you're talking about, the issues of the fertilizers, methanol, the issues of jet fuels, like for example the Kenya Airways, they're thinking of trying to fix itself so that in future we have our airplanes using hydrogen or jet fuels instead of the normal hydrocarbons. So yes, it's the future. It's the future. The policy is there. It's under the formulation, and I think also times are changing. If you check it, I don't know if I'm correct. What is bringing in the green hydrogen now and not 10 years ago. So if you check, maybe there's some of the contributions being, maybe the issues of Russia and Ukraine war now, it makes some players think that, okay, we have to think about going out of the scope and go to a new ventures. And what is that ventures? It is geothermal, which is very cheap. And where is it? Maybe it's found in Kenya. And so why? But likely. So it is something that the dynamics of the world and what's happening in the world makes some other things and or some stakeholders to change. And all of a sudden we have a lot of key financiers thinking of financing green hydrogen projects. Yes, engineers talked about the contracting and all that, but my point was this. We have these independent power producers. We have Kenya Power, we have GDC. It is like, for example, we have different agreements and a different setup. Now, there's a situation where you are told the IPPs are supposed, under the contract, to procure an independent engineer. Or even look at this, even the financing setup that we have in this country today, even if you go to KfW or FDB and all those things, sometimes they dictate where to get these consultants from. And even they are the ones to give you no objection. And even they are the ones to go through the CVs of those engineers. But the reality on the ground is that when they come to the ground and meet Kachumo, I'm just seeing my colleague, my Kenyan engineer, coming to do the job. That is where now we see we need really to review some of these instruments in place so that now we try as much as possible. The way they are doing the no objection back and forth when you are doing the evaluation of those guys, we need to place ourselves, our institutions in this country, to place ourselves, to really give ourselves a stage for our engineers in Kenya to play a role. Thank you.
I'll start with the great engineer Matu, Chairman Emeritus of ASEC. You asked a question about consolidation, which I will take after I've addressed the issue of energy. Now, India got independence in 1947. In 1948, they had a prime minister called Nehru. And he came up with a program of their country developing. And they also came up with a policy on agricultural mechanization. And what did Nehru say? That the first step of agricultural mechanization is rural electrification. For the reasons you have said, you know, for rural electrifications, once you have electricity there, you can have minor irrigation. All you need is a pump which is powered and you irrigate things. Whatever it is, whether it is a small processing plant and so on, if it's in the rural areas, you electrify it and you go forward. So that energy you talked about is quite important. And good engineer, you talked about bottoms up and why we are not going forward. Let me give you a small story. You are old enough to know that I was in the National Revenue Coalition, and that we developed a manifesto saying we'll build an SGR from Mombasa to Malaba, Kisumu, and we'll build it. We wanted it to go up to Congo. We wanted a highway the same way. And we wanted to produce a lot of power and power every single home in Kenya at that time. At that time, the energy, the total installed capacity for generating electricity in Kenya was it 2,000? It was 800 capacity, but about 1,200 installed, okay? Ethiopia had 500. Today, we have got about 3,000, And Ethiopia has got how much? No, but they are commissioning their dam, the Grand Renaissance Dam. They are going to have over 10,000 very soon. So they came from 500 to over 10,000 very soon. Us, we came from 500 to 3,000. That is the lack of ambition. And I had serious arguments with the Minister for Industry. He was called Muhisa Kitui. Apart from being my friend and college mate, he was also my brother-in-law. And I was telling him, if you talk about industries in Kenya, you must talk about producing power, a lot of it, a lot of power. And I was telling him that by the year 2030, we should need about 60,000 if we are to have industries. Because one aluminum smelting plant consumes 1,000. Just one. So South Africa has got what, 60,000? And they still have problems. So that is a problem of that. And we can get these things from renewable sources. We still have geothermal. We still have capacity for a lot of solar. We still have capacity for wind and so forth and so on. We can do that in this country here. Tanzania is soon going to have this Julius Nyerere Dam. And they're producing how much from that? 3,000? Yeah, 3,000, just one dam, which is going to come online soon in Tanzania here. And they have a few others in process. So that is where we should think. We should be very ambitious. Now, you talked about consolidation. Kenya and Africa are not the only continents which have had peasant farmers, small-scale farmers. They existed in Europe. In Europe, when England was industrializing, these people were displaced from the rural areas and they went to London, and they died. And Charles Dickens wrote about them. If you read the French writer, Émile Zola, he describes a lot of these guys who were displaced from the rural areas. They were peasants, and now they were very desolate in urban areas. So they were there, and Europe had a mixture of economic forces and political forces to consolidate their farming. If you watch cowboy movies in the US, they had small-scale farmers, even there at that time. But they consolidated their farms. Until when I was a student in 1985, the small farmers in the US were very badly stressed. So there was a concert for them by musicians called Farm Aid, before some of you were born. You remember Farm Aid? It was to collect money to help small-scale American farmers. What was the size of their farms? An average of 20,000 acres. Those were small farmers. Because companies like Boeing were farming millions of acres. That's the context. Now, in Eastern Europe, the collectivization was done by force. There are two countries we talked about here called Ukraine, another one called Russia. You know, the collectivization was done under Joseph Stalin. And people were moved by force. Some of them died. Some of them did what? And now 90 years later, 80 years later, their farms are consolidated. In China, they are consolidating. In India, they are still a little behind, but I think they'll go in that direction. China is doing two things. This physical consolidation, which you can do, and virtual one. Virtual consolidation is that there are a number of you, your neighbors. We know which acre is what. So we farm this thing collectively, and using intelligent systems, we know how much was from your farm, how much was from your farm, and then we share the money that way. But it's not new here. In agriculture, Kenya, we have consolidated various parts of the value chain. The Kenya Cooperative Creameries, the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, the Kenya Tea Development Authority those days, agency, and the sugar factories. They had some very modern factories which produced and used economies of large scale, and they had small farmers where they would collect the milk, consolidate the milk, process it in a modern factory, and then share the profits with these people down here. They are still doing it in coffee. I was a coffee factory engineer for some time in my life. Yeah, so it can be consolidation. You can start at some part of the value chain and consolidate, like in Kisii. If there's something they can produce in those small farms, but you can collect it, what they call aggregation, and then process it for them and then give them some money back, that may be a way of doing it. Now, the other one was about resistance to mechanization. I think I've addressed it. You can have carrot and stick of how to consolidate. You can do it physically, you can do it virtually, and there are many ways of doing it. Because you said increasing profits to multinationals. Of course, multinationals are ruthlessly large companies with very high levels of mechanization, so they are able to get a lot of profits. I think that is it. Then, I'm still going on. There's one more question. Okay. Numerical Machining Limited and so on, efforts involving universities. Yes, I've been in both systems, university and elsewhere, and there have been projects involving universities and other places. I've been involved in several of them. One of them, which I'll mention here, is in producing machines for production of oil seeds, pressing oil. I was involved in that project for a number of years. It was funded by the World Bank, UNDP, FAO, and a few other people. I worked in it for about 6-7 years. And that is what really took me those days to China and India to study their technologies. So yes, there have been many projects, even designing tractors and so forth and so on, between the universities and other industries and numerical machining complex, as it is. Thank you all very much. Santeni.
Please, a round of applause for our presenters before they leave the dais.